Let's talk about it. But if we're going to talk about it, let's really talk about it. Black folks have been warning us for a long time. And people not only haven't listened, but even with what's going on, people still don't want to listen. And I think this is a conversation that goes a lot deeper than even just the context of political discourse that surrounds us in America. This is a global phenomenon. But I want to start right here in the homeland, right here in the imperial core. Because, for one, I think Renee Good would want this to be talked about. I think the folks that have been suffering the brunt of state violence, which we are now becoming more and more unruly against, those folks would want this to be talked about the real way. Before I get into it, I just want to say I'm on break right now, so this is not the most organized type of conversation that I've, had. Just giving some thoughts while I am currently away from home. And I'm doing so off the cuff and in reaction to recent news. I don't think I need to remind you of that recent news. Of course, American imperialism in Latin America and Africa comes to mind. In Asia comes to mind. Of course, European imperialism comes to mind. Shout out to Norway. Norway gets away with a lot. It's also, of course, a reaction to the American Gestapo, the ICE shootings, multiple, plural shootings and killings that have occurred, not just in the videotaped incident in Minnesota, but in several incidences over the past years, with special attention being brought toward it right now. And of course, I want to say that I'm glad that more and more people are becoming aware, getting more politically engaged, getting more outraged. But outrage can only do so much. If your outrage is reduced to anger that you take out online and catchphrases that you sling around and one or two little protest walks, that outrage is more so in service of your own ego than it is in service of the wider community that we're trying to help. And this is something that we've all had to kind of learn, isn't it? It's a recurring story. We've had decades and decades of protest movements that have borne this thesis out. All that said, one of the phrases that we're seeing all over the place in response to the shooting of Renee Good is, that could have been any one of us. And yeah, not wrong. Especially harrowing, when it's the murder of a U.S. citizen, a law-abiding U.S. citizen, despite what the party wants you to believe about her conduct. But it also could have been us when it was Philando Castile.
The system continues to fail Black people, and they will continue to fail you all. Like I said, because this happened with Philando, when they get done with us, they're coming from you, for you, and all your interracial children. Y'all are next, and you'll be standing up here fighting for justice just as well as I am. I am so disappointed in the state of Minnesota. My son loved this state.
It could have been us when it was the wide variety of victims of state-sanctioned violence. Black men and women, Black trans folks, Black queer folks, who have consistently been martyred only for no large social media movement, no large political organizing rally to be conducted in response, at least one that, let's say, breaks color lines.
Last week, a man named Keith Porter was killed by an off-duty ICE agent, but you probably haven't heard his name. And while part of that may be because of the ICE agent being off-duty rather than on-duty with a large crowd, we also know the biggest reason why this exists. Keith Porter is a Black man, and Black men, Black women that get killed by agents, officers, don't get the same amount of national attention. Many people online have been very angry at me and other Black people for saying not to use the phrase "say her name" when it comes to Renee Good, and this is part of the reason. It has taken 7 days for the average person, and not even the average person, but for people online to find out about Keith Porter, while most people across the country know who Renee Good is within 24 hours. Within 24 hours, people have started marching for her. They have been sharing the stories of her families. They have been talking about her, sharing posts of her, memorializing her, making sure that she is known. Meanwhile, Keith Porter's family, they've been struggling to get into the news cycle. They've been struggling to have any conversation. And the same defense that ICE agents are using to justify killing Good is the same defense that they're using for justifying killing Porter. They say that he had a weapon and that he pointed it at them first, despite the fact that nobody on the scene concurred that, aside from the officer who shot him. These are the conversations that we need to be having. It's not divisive to ask you to use language that matters. It's not offensive to ask you to consider how you're speaking about an issue, because part of the reason why fascism is happening now in the United States is because certain groups of people have never had to care this much.
How did we let it get so bad? Do you know who could have warned you? Kwame Jones, William Howard Green, Jackeen O'Neil Light, Leonard Parker Jr., Carl Grant, Reginald Payne, Manuel Ellis, Barry Geddes, Donnie Sanders, Breonna Taylor.
These are lived realities for Black folks in the United States. And we often take that almost like it's supposed to happen. It informs us a little bit. It motivates us, especially when we feel particularly aggrieved with the United States, particularly mad at our elected officials, particularly mad at our rich capitalist classes. And then we put it aside and we continue on with our lives, because our lives, in our minds, are something separate from the lives of Black folks, from the lives of poor and working class Black folks, from the lives of Black martyrs. Our political reality is something separate from the Black Panthers. It's something separate from Black organizing work. It's something separate from anti-imperial organizing work. That's just stuff that we get into when we're in the mood. But as far as our lived reality, our everyday experiences, our relationship with our police forces, our relationships to money, our relationships to culture, as non-Black people, all of us view Black histories, Black cultural work, Black activism as separate, as something that's not connected to our own experience, as something novel that we can reach into like a bag of candy, pull out a little Twizzler every now and then, and use it to sugarcoat what we do. This is the kind of thing that you see borne out over and over again. And, there's been multiple TikToks that I will showcase in this video that really speak to this point. This is borne out when you see the wording, the verbiage, the responses, the thought processes that so many people have, and it's not just Americans, we are going to get into it, have in the response to political outrage. Here's one example, and one particular TikTok I'll show you gets into it. It's always Nazi Germany,
Even if we fix this right now, America gonna be right back in this situation in like 2 generations, because white people is not learning a lesson that they need to learn. Because here's the thing, you may not have started the original curse, but you, your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother, y'all have been feeding the curse generation after generation after generation. And this is the thing that's blowing my mind. Y'all keep saying Germany. Y'all keep pulling up pictures of German soldiers. Pull up them pictures of your grandparents outside them schools. Pull up the pictures of your great-grandparents at them picnics. Stop talking about Germany when they learned they playbook from a real specific group of motherfuckers who 2 generations they kids is looking at me on this goddamn app right now. Y'all are related to, in the same house as, and breaking bread with the motherfuckers that created this world that we live in today. And we warned you, and we warned you, and we warned you, and you warned you.
White people are always ready to compare the Trump administration to Nazi Germany, ICE as Gestapo, Trump as Hitler, etc. It's never white supremacist movements of the 50s and 60s. It's never the Ku Klux Klan. It's never what happened to the Black Panthers. It's never COINTELPRO. It's never Operation Condor. It's never the violence of neoliberalism. It's never the crack epidemic. It's never our various ventures into the Middle East. Those people, the things that they suffered from, the CIA assassination or the FBI assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., those are kind of curiosities. Those are interesting footnotes in a complicated and sometimes quite dark history of the world we live in today. Those are always peripheral. That's why it's the periphery. That's why Black Americans are a colonized people. This is something that I think a lot of people are not quite coming to grips with, and we will see that discourse play out over the next couple of years. We will see the use of the term internal colonies become popular, but not right now, because white people have this tendency, every time they get back into their outrage bag, every time they get back into their political commentary bag, every time new progressive movements form, thankfully, new social justice movements form, thankfully, and white people find themselves with platforms at the forefront of it, they're always in their minds inventing fire. They're always in their minds stumbling upon brand new ideas that they just have to share with everybody. So now that they've just figured out that imperialism is a thing, Now that they've just figured out the core periphery distinction a little bit, they've figured out that what we have in this country is built off of what we do to other countries, what we do to a global proletariat, a global exploited class. Now they want to tell everybody about it. They can't wait to tell you. Did you know what we do in the Congo? Yes. Yes. Did you know in Palestine? Yes. Right? And this is not me speaking from an arrogant standpoint, or I'm attempting not to be arrogant about it, because there's a lot that I'm still learning. And sometimes I'm guilty of this too. But, what happens in the process is then inevitably black folks will chime in and white people will speak over them all over again, as if these black folks are not speaking from the histories and experiences and the knowledges that have been built off of studying this very dynamic for centuries, which you are just now getting more active in your resistance towards. Case in point, there are these constant arguments about black Americans this. Every time something happens to a non-black person that bothers them, the first thing they think about is how much they hate black people. It's really telling because, I see a post on Tumblr about Pride Month, and it's this, young person clearly from like New Zealand who's angry about American exceptionalism and American imperialism and how it's distorted queer histories in New Zealand and Maori histories. And who's the subject of their ire? It's not white gay folks. It's not the bourgeois queer classes in the United States that are predominantly white. It's not white supremacy. They're mad at black trans women. Oh, Marsha P. Johnson has nothing to do with queer histories in New Zealand, right? What the hell do black trans women have to do with this? Why is the subject of your ire black folks, right? But they do this every time. They figure out something about how the world works, and they cannot wait to say, black people have not told me about this. Black people actually don't realize this. Black people think they're the only oppressed people. Black people have a perpetual victimhood mentality. Even some of the most self-proclaimed far-left people will fall into the same rhetoric time and time again, and it's tiring. It's tiring because they, within a couple of years, as I mentioned, we're going to be like, oh, did you know that the United States has internal colonies? You don't say. You don't say that some of the places that we would consider colonies are technically within the borders of the United States, technically part of U.S. states. It's a conversation that somehow was skirted about Hawaii. It's a conversation we're going to be having about Puerto Rico as Bad Bunny performs for the Super Bowl soon. But folks still do not acknowledge that there are black Americans and predominantly black, as well as brown neighborhoods, inner cities throughout the United States that still don't have clean drinking water, that don't have clean air to breathe, that have completely broken down housing situations, that live materially in conditions that are quite similar to many within the global south. And that likewise, there are many people living quite nicely in the global south, which is not to say that the extraction dynamic and the imperialism dynamics don't extend outside of the United States and don't often take place, or most of the time take place outside of US borders, but borders don't got nothing to do with it. Capitalism is a process of extraction. It is a process of sorting out who are the extractable classes, who are the exploited classes. And part of how you do that is through race. It's through racialization. Because racialization justifies caste, and caste justifies extraction. It justifies exploitation. You can learn this in India, right? You can learn this in the case of Indian history. Why is there a class of untouchables? Because somebody has to pick up the poop. Because somebody has to be the janitor. And we have to have a system through which we can continuously justify who has the worst jobs and who gets paid the least to do the stuff that nobody else wants to do. All of this is to say that black folks have been telling us this for a long time. Black folks have been telling us about state-sanctioned violence for a long time. Black folks have been talking about police abolition for a very long time. And it has become this red flag discourse, this something that triggers white folks, right? Abolish the police, abolish the police. But now that you have something attached to the Trump administration and branding, empowered by the Trump administration, and something that actively and aesthetically and remorselessly targets U.S. citizens who are sometimes white, all of a sudden it's abolish ICE. All of a sudden abolition is a popular concept because when it affects white people, they go from going like this to going like this. Does that make sense? And this is not something that is exclusive to just white people. This is a reality among non-black people globally, especially white people globally. There are many of us who are diligent in trying to learn from black Americans as well as other marginalized groups throughout the world. But there are many, many more of us, it seems, who are almost resolute in maintaining a dominant position socially over black people. One of the things you hear also about Americans is, oh, when are Americans going to revolt? I love this one. I want to sip some water before I talk about this one. Why don't Americans do what they're doing in Paris, what they've done in Paris? Why aren't they doing what's happening in Nepal? Oh, it's because Americans are so silly, they're so stupid, they're so uneducated, they're so selfish. Meanwhile, police precincts were getting burned in 2020. Resistance actions have been happening throughout the United States every single year, and it's black and it's brown folks that are often leading the charge. Right in this moment, you can look up Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, which is led by black folks, primarily economic solidarity programs, a solidarity network, a political network aimed at improving the material conditions for black and brown folks in Jackson, Mississippi. You can look this up right now and figure this out, right? You can learn about Chris Smalls right now, Amazon labor organizer, went to Palestine, was tortured by the IDF. You can learn about this, right? It's right there for you. But rather than look at that and say, some Americans are resisting and some aren't, and why is that? We would rather pretend that America is this united bloc where everybody benefits the same, or at least benefits close enough, and the marginalized groups in the United States are just these selfish, perpetually victimized bourgeois classes that don't care about the rest of the world. And who said that? Because at the same time, y'all are the type of people to cite Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and James Baldwin as your heroes, people who were stringent in talking about solidarity with the third world, anti-Vietnam War, pro-communist, pro-Palestine. Black folks have been on those waves literally for decades. And in the 2020s, in 2023, frankly, white folks found out about Palestine, read a couple of articles and were like, these damn black people have been lying to me because Palestinians are the real victims. How did you get there? How did you skip so much and get there? It's infuriating and it's frustrating. Because it's not just a dynamic that plays out in the United States. That kind of rhetoric is just another version of American exceptionalism. The idea that America is just so unique in its idiocy, so unique in its backwardsness, culturally, so unique in its selfishness. You know, you hear European folks lecture Americans about whether it's the protesting thing, as they ignore what black Americans have constantly been doing, or whether it's about capitalism, as if Europe is not dominated by a capitalist class anchored by the EU, which primarily benefits from the profit of extraction from the third world, just like the US, in coordination with the US. European folks will lecture Americans about racism in American society. They're like, I can't get my head around how a country could be so racist. Like literally everything in America is because of racism. As a European, I can't believe this. Are you serious? Really? You might want to think a little bit harder. These ideas of nation states and borders have clouded your mind. Because in France, y'all's whole economy is anchored on West Africa and France Afrique. Oh, you don't think we know about France Afrique? You don't think we've heard about Burkina Faso? You don't think we know about South Africa? You don't think we know about Kenya, Uganda? Europeans have been benefiting from colonial extraction for so long, and they've only done it in a sense where those extraction patterns happen more outside of the borders of the country. And European countries are the size of American states, sometimes American cities. And so it's essentially like you have these floating states full of white people whose economies, again, are founded on extraction from the third world. And then they have the nerve to be like, but we don't do systemic racism. We have like good labor protections. Europeans have good labor protections. Europeans work less hours in a day. Europeans take siestas. It's like, yeah, because your economy is anchored on industries that are either American or that are, you know, in the third world. Like that's how y'all figured it out. Same way the United States figured it out. The United States is a settler colonial project, which is European in origin. White Americans are European. But anti-blackness, oh, that's not relevant. But what black people say, oh, that has nothing to do with Europe. Oh, black people are so sensitive. They're such victims. They're perpetual victims. Okay. Hannah Arendt, everybody's favorite left-leaning thinker, with all the quotes that are near and dear to Western progressives' hearts. Hannah Arendt had a lot of smoke for Frantz Fanon. Hannah Arendt did not understand Frantz Fanon. Hannah Arendt said Frantz Fanon was justifying violence, because he wrote that violence is a key part of how the colonized gains its own sovereignty. Hannah Arendt said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Hannah Arendt downplayed the realities of violence in the colonies because she didn't want to look at what a Martinican French psychologist and philosopher had to say about the realities of violence faced by colonized people every single day. And to this day, even European progressives maintain this kind of hostility towards black decolonial thought. Aimé Césaire told y'all about yourselves a long time ago. On the subject of Nazi Germany, Aimé Césaire wrote that the European was aghast at what happened through the Nazis because it was the same type of violence and dehumanization and imperialism targeted towards other Europeans. And there were constant cries of this is not who we are and this is not the kind of conduct that is acceptable in Europe. I mean, it was for the centuries in which you accumulated all of this exploited wealth from the third world. Then the violence was fine for Europeans. What the Belgians did in Congo was totally fine. But once the Germans did what they did, now all of a sudden we got to talk about barbarism and violence and fascism. White people always find a way. Non-black people always find a way. Whether it's in South Korea, a country hell-bent on exploiting black American culture whilst looking down continuously on people on behalf of their skin color. Upholding European beauty standards and European standards of thought, European capitalist standards, American capitalist standards, aspiring through its elites to that kind of white supremacy. Same like in Japan or in Latin America. Something I've talked about very recently, something very near and dear to my heart. Black people have been telling you about Latin America. Not just black Americans. Afro-Latinos have led charges to deconstruct Latinidad, have led charges to talk about why white supremacy is dominant in Latin America, why the elites of Latin America remain either the descendants of or new versions of the European settler classes that created Latin America in the first place. And all this talk about salsa and empanadas and comida criolla, all this stuff is just whitewashed versions of African and indigenous lived realities to be branded as Latino, branded as something new, branded as something better than backwards Africans. The role that Haiti played historically in liberating Latin America, I mean, there is nowhere near the same level of success for Simón Bolívar without the contributions of Haitians and without what the Haitians did in Haiti. Only for Simón Bolívar, who was an avowed abolitionist, to not free the slaves. Over and over again, black folks are there. Right there. The uprisings, the slave revolts, the Haitian Revolution, the black Marxism in the 20th century, Walter Rodney, Frantz Fanon, W.E.B. Du Bois, though he has some ableism that we don't talk about in his work, the James Baldwins. And even now, folks don't want to read Olufemi Taiwo. Folks don't want to read Angela Davis. Folks still want to figure it out without learning from the people that experienced the brunt, the harshest end of this capitalist imperialist project for centuries and centuries, and created forms of life in resistance to it, forms of life separate from it, forms of resistance, forms of rebellion, forms of culture, forms of intellectualism, forms of spirituality, forms of romantic concepts, all in response to that domination. And there's a whole massive canon of black authors that will teach you about this world that you're just coming into. And you still don't want to read them. You still don't want to take their words seriously. You still use them for decoration. And you don't take them to heart. And this is the reality that we live in. A world where globally anti-blackness is still this dominant force, in part because nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to center it. Nobody wants to give it air. Everybody wants to act like it's an unfortunate coincidence that this capitalist, billionaire rigged, extractivist, misogynist project that is the United States, as well as other global north countries coming into awareness of this. Everybody wants to act like that project, having black people consistently at the economic bottom, at the cultural bottom, at the social bottom of its hierarchy, is a coincidence. Something that will just clear up if we just, tax the rich a little bit more. Oh, if we just tax the rich a little bit more, and if we just protest a little bit harder, and if we just, if we just get a bunch of white guys with guns, we'll sort this thing out. As if the white guys don't have guns so that they can maintain that system. As if as soon as the Black Panthers armed themselves, the NRA became interested in gun control. As soon as a black person comes into the picture, all the non-black people come together and figure out how they can keep the black person at the bottom and use them so that they can maintain some level of resources, some level of economic advantage comparatively. And the light-skinned brown people and the East Asians, they're more than happy to stay underneath white people so long as they remain above black people. Even certain indigenous folks who have long been in solidarity with black people and who have had long, for a long time, movements in connection with black people and a shared struggle with black people. Even certain indigenous folks don't listen to black people, don't like black people. And frankly, this is a conversation that's not really for me to have. There's a lot of black people that don't listen to black people. In 2026, there is not a single person who I am interested in listening to if they haven't committed themselves to learning from black history, from black politics, from black culture. I don't expect everybody to be a radical Afro-socialist, Afrocentrist overnight. I don't expect everybody to know everything because I don't know everything. I don't expect everybody to be perfect because I'm not perfect. But we've got to have a standard here. We've got to have a little bit of accountability. There's no excuse at this point. No excuse. Because black people have had social media for a long time. Because we marched out in the streets for BLM. Because we watched what happened in real time in Minnesota. The last time in Minnesota. There's no excuse in 2026 for you still to be looking exclusively at white folks explaining to you how they oppress other people and not to the people that they oppress. There's no reason even that your education about what ICE does towards brown immigrants in the United States should lead you to only learn from white people who educate you about that. All these white folks who spring up with their platforms and I got something to tell you about how to locally organize, and I got something to tell you about farms, and I got something to tell you about, it's great. A lot of the content is great. If you're not reading black people, learning from black people, in solidarity with black people, it's just not going to be enough. You can call it a purity test if you want. You can call it woke and you can call it performative all you want. The same lessons will persist if you refuse to learn from the people who have studied them the most. I don't feel like that's a very complicated notion. But I really appreciate that a lot of people are trying. And maybe for some of you, this video will be, if not a wake-up call, I don't want to be pretentious about myself, but some type of energizing moment in which you're like, yes, absolutely. This is the time that I start learning from Black liberation struggle. This is the time I read C.L.R. James, the Black Jacobins. This is the time that I start reading James Baldwin. This is the time I start reading any number of Black scholars, Black historians. This is the time that I start learning actually what the difference is between one African country and another. Frankly, this is a conversation that extends to Africa, especially when we talk about North Africa versus Sub-Saharan Africa. We are in the middle of an AFCON right now, an African international soccer competition, football competition, in which people learned about Patrice Lumumba for the first time because the Congo, the DRC, was participating and they had a fan who dressed up as Patrice Lumumba as part of their fan cheer section. And it was explained to people what the significance of this was. Only for an Algerian player to make fun of this Patrice Lumumba, to make fun of this fan. Yeah, even in Africa, this is a problem. Just think about how much you're missing. I highly encourage people to remain active, to build their wisdom, and to build their capacity for hope, because these are necessary resources. And part of how you learn, I see sometimes people post online, how can one find joy in a time like this? How can one find connection in a time like this? How do you not just give up? If black people didn't give up in the 1700s, how the hell are you, a non-black person, going to give up now? What excuse do you have? Learn from what they've done. And I promise you, you will not regret it, because it has not only implications on what we can do politically as a collective, it has significant implications on how we live our own lives, on who we are, our own identities, our own abilities to connect with other people. I hope all this made sense. And I hope you're doing as well as possible. I hope to see you soon.